The eviction notice was taped to the front door of my own house. I stood on the porch in the gray November dawn, a single suitcase at my feet, and read the legal jargon through blurred vision. Unlawful detainer. Failure to vacate. Possession granted to the rightful owner, Mr. Julian Ashford. My husband. My husband was evicting me from the home I had designed, the home I had built, the home I had paid for with the money I earned before I made the catastrophic mistake of merging my finances with his. The door opened. Julian stood there in his cashmere robe, his hair perfectly tousled, his smile the particular smile of a man who had just won a war I didn't know we were fighting. Behind him, I could see the foyer. The foyer I had sketched on a napkin at a cafe in Florence. The foyer with the curved staircase that had won a Design Institute award. His suitcase was packed. His luggage, his entire life was already being loaded into a moving van by men in uniform who wouldn't meet my eyes. Camille, Julian said, and his voice was warm, the voice he used when he was explaining to investors why his projects went over budget. I was hoping you'd leave quietly. The new owners are arriving this afternoon. It's better for everyone if you're not here. The new owners. My voice came out strangely calm. Julian, this is my house. I designed it. I inherited the land from my grandmother. The deed has my name on it. The deed has our name on it. Marital property. And since the divorce was finalized last week, the court has awarded me possession. He pulled a document from his robe pocket and held it out. You contested nothing. You signed everything. You have no claim, no rights, and no home. That's what happens when you walk away from a marriage without a lawyer. I didn't take the document that I didn't need to. I remembered signing the papers 6 months ago in a fog of grief and exhaustion because Julian had told me it was just a formality, and I had believed him. I had believed him because I had just buried my mother, because I had been surviving on 2 hours of sleep a night, because I had loved this man for 10 years, and I had never, not once, imagined he would weaponize my trust against me. Behind Julian, a woman appeared at the top of the curved staircase. She was young, 25, maybe, with glossy black hair and a silk robe that matched Julian's. She was holding a coffee mug that I recognized, MY mug, the one I had brought back from Japan after winning the Kyoto design competition, the one with the hand-painted cherry blossoms. Julian, honey, is that the moving company? She descended the stairs with the easy confidence of someone who already owned the place. Oh, that you're still here. She looked at me with a flicker of something, pity, maybe, or contempt. I thought you were supposed to be gone by now. This is Elena, Julian said, and his hand found her waist with the familiarity of long practice. Elena, this is Camille, my ex-wife. I know who she is. Elena took a sip from my mug. You designed this house, right? It's beautiful that we're going to be very happy here. Julian's already promised to remodel the master suite. It's a little dated, and oh offense. The master suite, the room where I had spent 3 years perfecting the light angles, so the morning sun would fall across the bed in exactly the right way. The room where I had lain awake countless nights, listening to Julian's quiet breathing, wondering why I felt so alone in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. How long? I asked. My voice was still calm. I was proud of that. Julian's smile flickered. How long what? How long have you been with her? That's irrelevant. The marriage is over. The divorce is final. You need to leave. 2 years, Elena said, and her voice was almost kind. 2 years in March. Julian and I met at a real estate conference in Miami. You were home with your mother. She was sick, wasn't she? Cancer? Julian said it was very hard on you. 2 years, and my mother had been dying for 3 years. For 2 of those years, while I was driving her to chemotherapy appointments and sleeping on hospital couches and slowly watching the only family I had left slip away, my husband had been with another woman. Planning this, planning everything. The land, I said, turning back to Julian. The land his house is built on. You know, it's not just any land. It's valuable land. I'm aware. That's why I'm keeping it. It's not valuable. It's sacred. I stepped closer, and Julian actually took a half step backward. My grandmother, Eleanor Vance, bought this land in 1962. She bought it with money she earned as a seamstress, saving pennies for 30 years. She bought it because it overlooks the river where her parents first arrived in this country, and she wanted her descendants to always have a place that belonged to them. She gave this land to me on her deathbed, and I promised her I would protect it. Sentimental. Julian rolled his eyes. But sentiment doesn't hold up in court. The land is mine now. The house is mine. Everything inside it. He gestured at my suitcase. Except for your personal effects, which you've already packed. You can go. I didn't move. Julian, do you know what happens to people who try to take land from the Vance family? Elena laughed, a tinkling sound. The Vance family? Your last name is Ashford. You're not a Vance. You're nobody. My grandmother was a Vance, and my mother was a Vance, and I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I am the sole trustee of the Vance Land Trust, which has owned this property since 1962. The deed you think you have, it's invalid. The court order you just handed me. It's based on a deed that's invalid. And the moving van you hired, it's about to turn around and take everything you packed right back inside. Julian's face went pale. That's not. The trust was dissolved when you married me. I checked. I had lawyers check. You had lawyers check the public records, but the Vance Land Trust isn't public. It's private. It's been private for 60 years, and the only person who can dissolve it is me, which I didn't. Not when I married you. Not when I signed your formality papers, not ever. I pressed a button on my phone. The sound of heavy engines rumbled up the long driveway, not a moving van, a convoy of black SUVs, led by a silver Maybach that gleamed in the gray morning light. The vehicle stopped in front of the house, and doors opened. Men in dark suits emerged, followed by a woman in a perfectly cut charcoal blazer, Margaret Chin, the CEO of Vance Land Trust. Behind her, a survey team carrying equipment. Behind them, a sheriff's deputy. Miss Vance, Margaret said, striding up the porch steps. The eviction notice has been voided. The fraudulent deed has been flagged. The court has issued an emergency stay. And the Ashfords. She looked at Julian and Elena with the dispassionate gaze of someone examining a particularly uninteresting insect. Have 30 minutes to vacate the premises. Elena's coffee mug slipped from her fingers. MYMUG. IT shattered on the marble floor. Cherry blossoms scattering across the stone like tiny pink tears. What? No. Julian, you said this was yours. You said she had nothing. She has nothing. Julian grabbed the court order from my hand and scanned it, his eyes wild. This is a forgery. This is a trick. Camille, you're a residential architect. You design houses for other people. You're not. You're not a land baron. You're not a Vance. I'm a residential architect because I love designing homes, I said. I didn't need the money. I never needed the money. The Vance Land Trust is worth $400 million. It owns 14 commercial properties in 3 states. It's been quietly managing the family's real estate holdings for 6 decades. And I've been running it from my home office while you thought I was just designing houses. 400. Julian staggered backward. His robe came untied, revealing a chest that was starting to go soft. You're worth $400 million? We were married for 10 years. You let me struggle. You let me work weekends. You let me take out loans. I let you build a business. I offered to help you. You said you didn't want my help. You said you wanted to be self-made. So I stepped back and let you be self-made. And you responded by having an affair, emptying our joint accounts, and trying to evict me from my grandmother's land. That wasn't a struggle. Julian, that was a choice. The sheriff's deputy stepped forward. Mr. Ashford, you have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings. The moving company has been instructed to unload any items that belong to Ms. Vance. You are not to remove any fixtures, furnishings, or materials that are part of the property. Elena burst into tears. Julian, do something. I can't. I left my apartment for this. I put my savings into this. You said we'd be rich. Julian grabbed my arm. His grip was too tight, his face too close. You lied to me. For 10 years, you lied to me. Every time you said you were just an architect, you were lying. Every time you let me worry about money, you were lying. You're a monster, Camille, but a cold, calculating monster. No. I pulled my arm free. I'm a woman who listened to her grandmother, and my grandmother told me, on our wedding day, to never let you know about the trust. She said, if he loves you for you, the truth won't matter. If he doesn't, you'll be glad you kept it hidden. She was right. You didn't love me. You loved what you could take from me. And now you can't take anything. Margaret Chen handed me a tablet. The legal team is ready. The fraud charges have been filed. The divorce decree is being challenged, and the asset recovery process has begun. All of Mr. Ashford's accounts, Personal, business, and joint will be frozen by end of day. Fraud charges. Julian's voice cracked. You're pressing charges? You tried to steal land that has been in my family for 60 years. You forged documents. You lied to the court. Yes, I'm pressing charges. Elena grabbed Julian's arm, her silk robe slipping off one shoulder. Julian, please, I can't be involved in fraud charges. Did I have a record? I didn't know about any of this. I thought you owned the house. So did I. Julian shook her off. So did I, until 10 minutes ago. He turned back to me, and his face cycled through desperation, rage, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. Camille, please, we can fix this. We've been through so much together. Your mother, I was there when your mother died. I held your hand at the funeral. You were texting Elena during the funeral. I saw the messages. I didn't say anything because I was too tired, too broken, too empty to fight. But I saw them. I saw everything. I just didn't have the strength to act until now. I turned to the sheriff's deputy. Please make sure they only take what's legally theirs. Everything else stays. Yes, ma'am. I walked down the porch steps, past the shattered mug, past the moving van that was now being unloaded by a crew that had been hired, unknowingly, to remove me from my own home. The Maybach's door opened, and I slid into the warm leather interior. Margaretchen climbed in beside me. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said this day would come. She just didn't know it would take so long. She knew. I looked out the window at the house, my grandmother's land, my legacy. She told me once that I would have to fight for everything I loved, that I thought she meant my career. I didn't realize she meant my marriage. The divorce has been reopened. The fraudulent deed has been flagged. And the criminal charges. Let them go forward. All of them. Margaret nodded. Understood. She paused. There's also a call for you from a Mr. Adrian Sterling. He said he's been trying to reach you for months. Apparently, you and he met at an architecture symposium 5 years ago, and he's been following your work ever since. He wants to discuss a development project, something about a new museum on the riverfront. The land is owned by the Vance Trust. Adrian Sterling, I remember him, a tall man with sharp eyes and an unexpected laugh, who had stayed after my lecture to ask questions about sustainable design. We had talked for 2 hours. He had given me his card, and I had never called because I was married and I didn't believe in calling men I met at symposiums, but I had kept the card. It was still in my desk drawer, somewhere in the house that was now being reclaimed. Tell him I'll call him tomorrow, I said. Today, I need to bury my marriage. And tomorrow, I need to start building something new. The Maybach pulled away, and I watched my house recede in the window. In the driveway, Julian was shouting at the sheriff's deputy while Elena sobbed on the porch steps, her silk robe flapping in the November wind. They looked small from here, smaller than I remembered. 10 years of marriage point 10 years of shrinking point 10 years of letting a man call my ambition cute and my success lucky and my family's legacy irrelevant. And in one morning, in less than an hour, I had reclaimed everything. Not revenge, reclamation. 3 years earlier, I had stood in the kitchen of this same house, my phone pressed to my ear, listening to my mother's oncologist explain that the cancer had spread. Julian was in the next room, on his laptop, and when I came in crying, he had looked up with an expression of mild annoyance. I'm on a call, he'd said. Can you give me 5 minutes? I had given him 5 minutes, but I had given him 10 years, and in return, he had taken every vulnerable moment I'd ever shared with him and turned it into a weapon. My mother's illness. He'd used it to distract me while he transferred assets, and my grief. He'd used it to get me to sign papers I didn't read. My trust. He'd used it to build a parallel life with a woman who was young enough to believe his lies. I had known, in some buried part of myself, what he was doing, but knowing and acting are different things. Knowing is quiet, acting is loud. And I had been quiet for so long that I had forgotten how to be loud. Until this morning, until the eviction notice. Until a stranger stood in my foyer wearing my robe and drinking from my mug and telling me my designs were dated. That was the moment, the breaking point, the instant when the quiet woman I had become finally, irrevocably, remembered the fierce woman I used to be. The deposition was held 3 weeks later. Julian's lawyer was a bulldog of a man who tried every trick in the book, casting doubt on the trust's validity, questioning my grandmother's mental state when she created it, implying that I had hidden assets to avoid spousal support. My legal team shredded every argument. The trust was ironclad. The land had never been marital property. The deed Julian had filed was a forgery, and the notary who had stamped it had already confessed to taking a bribe. Julian sat across the conference table, his arrogance stripped away, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of a man who was watching his entire future collapse. Elena was not with him. I had learned, through the grapevine, that she had left him the day after the eviction, claiming she could be with someone who lied to her. The irony was almost too perfect. "Ms. Vance," Julian's lawyer said, "my client is willing to drop all claims to the property and to the marital assets in exchange for a waiver of criminal prosecution." "No deal," I said. "Ms. Vance, be reasonable. A criminal trial will be lengthy, expensive, and emotionally draining. It will drag your private life through the courts. It will hold my ex-husband accountable for fraud, forgery, and attempted grand larceny. IT'll set a precedent that people who try to steal family land will face consequences. And it will give me the closure that 10 years of marriage never provided. I'm not looking for reasonable. I'm looking for justice." Julian stood up, so fast his chair tipped over. "Camille, I'm begging you. If I go to prison, I'll lose everything. My business, my reputation, Your business was built on loans I co-signed. Your reputation is based on designs I created. And your freedom. Your freedom is the price you pay for trying to steal something that was never yours. You called me nobody on that porch. You let your mistress mock my mother's death. You tried to evict me from my grandmother's land, and now you want me to be merciful? No. I'm not the merciful wife anymore. I'm the woman you should have been afraid of all along." I stood up, and my legal team followed. "We're done here. The criminal charges stand. I'll see you in court." As I walked out, Julian's voice followed me, first pleading, then furious, then breaking into something that might have been sobs. The door closed, and the sound cut off like a switch. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Julian was convicted on 4 counts of fraud, 2 counts of forgery, and 1 count of attempted grand larceny. The sentencing judge called it one of the most egregious cases of marital fraud I've ever seen. Julian was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, followed by a restitution order that seized every asset. He would emerge with nothing. No business, no money, no home. Elena was called as a witness. Her testimony was rambling and self-serving, but it confirmed everything. The affair, the plan to take the house, the forged signatures. When she stepped down from the stand, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Regret? Resentment? It didn't matter. She was no longer my problem. The day after the verdict, I stood in the front yard of my grandmother's house, my house, watching a crew of workers restore the gardens that Julian had neglected. The roses my grandmother had planted in 1965 were still alive, buried under weeds, but stubbornly blooming. I knelt down and touched one of the petals, and for the first time since my mother died, I felt my grandmother's presence. Not a ghost, just a memory. The memory of a woman who had sewed dresses for 30 years to buy this land, and who had told me, on the day she gave it to me, that it was my job to protect it. I had protected it, not with silence, but with the truth I had kept hidden for a decade. The truth that had finally, explosively, set me free. My phone buzzed. A text from Adrian Sterling. "I heard about the verdict. Congratulations, and I know it's been a difficult few months. MY offer still stands. The museum project, if you're interested, and dinner, if you're up for IT. And oh pressure as." I smiled. Adrian Sterling, the man who had been waiting in the wings, patient and undemanding, while I fought the battle of my life. I had called him, as promised, the day after the eviction. We had talked for 3 hours about architecture and land conservation and the future of urban design. He was brilliant and funny and unexpectedly kind, and he had never once asked me to shrink. I typed back, asterisk dinner, Friday, but I'm choosing the restaurant. CV, asterisk. Asterisk wouldn't have it any other way. Asterisk. I pocketed my phone and looked out at the river below the house. The river my great-grandparents had crossed. The river my grandmother had watched from this very spot. The river that would flow long after I was gone. The land was mine again. The legacy was secure. And the future was wide open. 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop of the newly completed Sterling Tower, Adrian beside me, looking out at a city that was about to receive a gift. The museum project, the Eleanor Vance Museum of American Immigration, was officially breaking ground next week. The land, donated by the Vance Land Trust, would house a museum dedicated to the stories of families like mine, families who had crossed oceans with nothing and built something extraordinary. This is going to change lives, Adrian said. It already has. It changed mine. I leaned against the railing, the wind catching my hair. My grandmother used to say that land wasn't just dirt, IT was memory, that IT was belonging. It was the one thing no one could ever take from you, because it was where you came from. I didn't understand what she meant until I almost lost it. But you didn't lose it. No, I didn't. I turned to him. Thank you for waiting. I would have waited longer. He took my hand. You're worth waiting for. We stood together, watching the sun set over the river, the same river my great-grandparents had crossed a century ago. Somewhere in a prison cell, my ex-husband was counting the days until his release. Somewhere, his mistress was living a life that had nothing to do with me. And I was standing on top of the world, beside a man who saw me, really saw me, and loved me anyway. Not because I was rich, not because I was powerful, but because I was the woman who had fought for her land, her legacy, and her name. Camille Vance, architect, land steward, survivor. And I was just getting started.